Slovakia continues with its appeasement policies towards Russia, and today it's the Slovakian Foreign Minister, Juraj Blanar, who has suggested that the international community might perhaps forgive Russia's actions and resume dialogue with Moscow as a pathway towards ending the war in Ukraine. Of course, we should be having dialogue with Moscow, but we shouldn't forgive. There's no reason to forgive a state that invades its neighbour. Speaking on Slovak broadcasting station STVR, he claimed that the conflict cannot be resolved on the battlefield and must instead rely on diplomatic means and respect for international law. I entirely agree. In his words, however, he says, let us return to respect for international law and seek ways to communicate with the Russian Federation and perhaps even forgive everything that has happened. The problem is the Russian Federation, under Putin, broke international law by invading their neighbour. These remarks were not made in isolation. They came after Slovakia blocked the adoption of the EU's 18th package of sanctions against Russia, citing concerns over how the Repower EU plan might affect member states' energy needs. Under Prime Minister Robert Fico, Slovakia has markedly diverged from the broader EU and NATO consensus. Fico has maintained diplomatic relations with Moscow throughout the war. He cancelled Slovak military aid to Ukraine as soon as he took office in 2023. And earlier this year, he attended Putin's Victory Day parade in Moscow and met with Vladimir Putin himself, or at least with one of the doubles, the doppelgangers, as Putin is almost certainly in a fridge, freezing or disintegrating. He dismisses, that's Fico, every symbolic diplomacy with Ukraine, saying, I see no reason to meet with the Ukrainian president. My meeting with President Zelensky has no significance because he hates me. Well, there is a paradox here. Despite these gestures of reconciliation towards Russia, of conciliation towards Russia, Fico has voiced support for Ukraine's EU membership, arguing that it benefits Slovakia economically and strategically, and this contradictory stance suggests opportunism rather than principle. Blanar calls for perhaps forgive everything. It's not mere rhetoric, it represents an age-old strategy of appeasement, the hope that accommodating an aggressor will buy peace at an acceptable cost. Europe has seen this before. In the 1930s, calls to forgive and understand Nazi Germany's grievances were popular among states desperate to avoid conflict. The policy of appeasement famously culminated in the Munich Agreement of 1938, when British and French leaders accepted Hitler's annexation of the Sudetenland in exchange for vague promises of peace. We know how that ended. Appeasement didn't prevent war, it enabled and emboldened the aggressor. Similarly, asking Ukraine or the international community to forgive Russia while its troops occupy Ukrainian territory sends a signal that violations of sovereignty and war crimes can be washed away by diplomatic platitudes. They can't. As long as Russia is in Ukraine, it is illegally annexing. Is that the word? There's an illegal annexation of Ukraine going on. By blocking sanctions, Bratislava offers Moscow an opportunity to exploit division. It weakens the credibility of EU foreign policy as a whole. NATO unity is shaken. Trust among allies depends on predictable commitments to shared defence and deterrence. And when a member state equivocates like this, it undermines deterrence and emboldens Russia's hope of outlasting Western resolve. This division is precisely what Moscow wants. It seeks to split Western societies, fragment EU decision-making and encourage fence-sitting among its neighbours. Slovakia's stance is not realism, it's not diplomacy. It's appeasement dressed up as pragmatism. And suggesting that Ukraine should perhaps forgive an unprovoked invasion ignores the victims of war crimes, the millions of refugees, the flattened cities, the principle of sovereignty that underpins European security. If Europe rewards aggression with dialogue on the aggressor's term, it signals to all would-be invaders that might makes right. It doesn't. True diplomacy requires negotiating from strength, insisting on accountability, and refusing to abandon principles for expedience. Slovakia risks sacrificing its credibility as a reliable ally and partner in pursuit of a short-term and illusory calm. I hope this lesson of appeasement, learned at such cost in the past, is not forgotten in the face of present convenience.